And next, I'd like to invite our second speaker, Ms. Eon-Kyung, Deputy President of KMI. Ms. KMI has a diverse background working as a researcher at the Seoul Institute and the Korea Institute of Science and Technology, as well as serving as a consultant at Entrue Consulting of LGCN. She is currently the Deputy Head of Logistics and Maritime Industry Research Division at the KMI. She also serves on the Port Policy Review Committee of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries and the Logistics Policy Committee of the City of Busan. To speak about the topic of ship fuel transition and future changes in the maritime logistics industry, please welcome Ms. Lee Eon-Kyung with a big hand. Good morning. As introduced, I am Eon-Kyung. I would like to today speak about the ship fuel transition and expanding this to maritime logistics. This is the content of my presentation, the 4 topics. First of all, let's look at the IMO and the EU and the efforts to reduce GHG emissions. You can see there are a number of ways. And first of all, there's the EDI, the technical measures, and the operational measures such as SEAMP or CII. And there's also the economic midterm measure, such as levies. And as a long-term measure, how to expand zero carbon fuel. So here, what we need to pay attention to is CII, which is a strong measure. As you know, CII will be grading ships into A, B, C, D, E. And if you have 1 E or 3 Ds in a row, then you will not be able to operate your ship. At the EU, there are a number of measures, just 3 things: EU ETS and MRV, and Fit for 55. EU ETS will come into effect in 2024. And if you do not meet the standards, you will no longer be in the market. And MRV, you have to measure, report, and verify your carbon. And if not, for 2 consecutive times, then you will be kicked out of the market. And if you fail to present this once, you will be receiving a penalty. EU has another measure called Fit for 55, including all ships in all the maritime areas. 55% of GHG emission will be reduced. So not only shipping and maritime logistics, the EU is looking at how to reduce GHG emissions across the sector. As you are well aware, back in July, there was the MEPC 80th session where the GHG reduction target was set for 2030, 40, and 50. By 2050, as you can see, we are aiming for net zero. So basically no GHG emission at all. And by 2030, compared to a 2008 benchmark, 20% at least, at minimum, of carbon intensity will be reduced. And by 2040, 70%. As for fuels, of the total fuel used for shipping, at least 5% will be zero or near zero GHG emission fuel. And following this measure, there are many changes taking place. And again, as you know, there's the Green Shipping Corridor. As of June 2023, about 30 such corridor initiatives have been announced. Busan-Tacoma route is one such pilot project. And as for the preliminary feasibility study, the results will come out at COP28 in December. So we will continue to expand these efforts. And as you can see on this slide, for ships in operation, only 6% are run on LNG, eco-friendly fuels. But if you look at ships on order, more than 50% of the ships will be using not only LNG, but methanol or other eco-friendly fuels. So that just shows you the magnitude of how quickly we will be transitioning into eco-friendly fuel for ships. And on the right-hand side, you see the McKinsey data compared to 2030. By 2050, you see a much more colorful bar graph, which means a diversity of eco-friendly fuel sources, including methanol or ammonia. So these are some of the eco-friendly fuels that you will see come online, and not just nuclear power. Nuclear power is also one such power source that we are considering to adopt. And this is about how we look at GHG performance. We first look at well-to-tank and then tank-to-wake. Well-to-tank is just up to the bunkering level, but we have to expand that to also look at tank-to-wake or tank-to-propeller. This is where the fuel is actually consumed. So you need to look at the entire SOC to have the exact picture of the GHG performance. So we are now much more focusing on the well-to-wake perspective. And as you can see, there are orange and blue bar graphs. The smallest emission comes from the liquid hydrogen. So in terms of blue bar graphs, yes, the tank-to-propeller, you do see a lot of emissions, but overall, liquid hydrogen has the lowest emission. And so what it means to transition ship fuel is that the changes will not only involve ship, but in production of power and storage and shipping. So compared to the LNG, ammonia or liquid hydrogen should receive more attention because these two fuel sources, in terms of port facilities, lack the necessary facilities. In the case of ammonia, we can still tap into LPG facilities by retrofitting LPG transport facilities for ammonia use, but for liquid hydrogen, we do not have the CCS technology or FGSS that needs to be used to inject liquid hydrogen to the engine. So there's a lot of areas for liquid hydrogen research. And starting from this slide, I wanted to talk about how the change of ship fuel involves much more than the ship itself, because we have to keep in mind the 7 different steps involved, including the carbon neutral fuel supply and demand, the monitoring during transport, and how much emissions will be expected. And then I'm going to go into details for each of the steps. First of all, how do we generate carbon neutral fuel and how much is the demand? So we need to predict the supply and demand. According to DNV, the level high, it says on the right-hand side, that's the level of carbon neutral fuel that can be produced. And then at the bottom, that is the demand that we see to come from shipping sector. So depending on the price and other impacting elements, we can expect the fluctuation in the prices and determine whether to place a new ship order or other predictions to make for us to order the right amount of eco-friendly fuel-based ships. And secondly, I did mention this briefly before, the engine and ship technologies are bound to change. In the past, ammonia or new sources of fuel, double, triple engines had to be in place. And as I mentioned before, the nuclear power plants or eco-friendly electricity can be used for transport and shipping technologies that will have to happen. So these are some of the technologies for the ship engine and shipping technology that are bound to happen because of the new sources of fuel. And the third step is the changes in the containers. As I said before about FGSS for the engine or CCS, CCS will change not only the transport containers, but also what goes on top of the trucks, like the cooling ISO tanks you see on the right-hand side for secondary battery electrolytes or milk. Cryogenic ISO tanks will be used for liquid hydrogen transportation. So this will require more research of how to develop these types of storage tanks. And then port facility changes. As I said before, ammonia or liquid hydrogen will require new port facilities that are not in place yet. Some of the methanol facilities are in place at ports, but when it comes to ammonia or liquid hydrogen, there is really no port facilities in place, and depending on who makes them well and how much, they can be the leader in this segment. Ports so far have focused on speed, but going forward, whether the ports are capable of providing eco-friendly fuels will make or break whether a ship will call to that port or not. So the way we look at the port productivity and the competitiveness should be expanded to include the considerations of these fuel facilities. And fifth, we need to also think about the changes in maritime transport routes from the changes in the fuels, because we will have to travel other routes. LNG and liquid hydrogen, as you can see in this table, boil-off rate is very high for liquid hydrogen, and they need to be stored at a very low temperature. So whether to go through the Suez Canal or to go through the North Sea route, as you can see, we actually did an analysis and found that during the summertime, about $3 million, and winter, about $5 million of benefit can come from taking the North Sea route versus the Suez Canal. Step 6 is how the fuel transition can easily explode. So as you can see here, off the Dutch coast, there was one such accident. 3,000 cars on the ship were being carried, and this ship went on fire. So we need to reroute the ships to avoid this route. And to find out the alternative routes, we can use the E2E Stories platform that we have newly built. So we came to make this platform with big data technology. We looked at the natural disasters or changes in the environment for risk monitoring. And secondly, for instance, if we just looked at the Busan and Rotterdam ports and put together all the different routes in order to avoid the high-risk routes. So here you can see the word risk, and if you can choose a low-risk route, then we can choose the safer shipping route, and we can avoid the problem early on. So we do need a risk monitoring platform. And that's why we became to build this platform. And step 7, I was really rushing through my presentation to come to this slide. CII is very important. And if the GHG emission does not meet CII standards, then the shipping company will be kicked out of the market. So we have developed the digital twin technology, as you can see right here, with the Sejong University to see ships inland logistics and put together everything on the digital twin technology. We looked at, depending on the operation patterns and the fuels, and we were able to calculate the fuel consumption. And from CIA perspective, which ships will be kicked out of the market, or depending on low speed, medium speed, and high speed operations, what happens to the emission. So we are able to see transition into eco-friendly fuel, how much of CO2 emissions will come from the fuels, and we also need a monitoring system for all that. So just a simple transition in the fuel. Well, this involves much more changes than the changes in the ships. We need to look at the entire logistics ecosystem altogether. So starting from monitoring what kind of port facilities to install, and tracking and monitoring all of this. If you have a system in place for that, then you will be much more efficient. And that will be the end of my presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much. We heard about the ship fuel transition and future changes in the maritime logistics industry in a very easy, simple way. Thank you, Deputy President Eon-Kyung.